He once called her unfit to work in his company, but tonight, she was the one signing the check for his dinner. Inside her 50 mansion, like and subscribe to support us and black people. You don't remember me, do you? She said softly, pouring his wine. The man chuckled, leaning back in the Italian leather chair, the light from the chandelier flickering across his aging but confident face. His cufflinks gleamed, and custom gold engraved with his initials, EC, should I? He replied, voice laced with arrogance, as his sharp blue eyes wandered around the dining room that seemed far too grand for one person to own. Aisha didn't answer right away. She placed the bottle down gently, the deep red liquid swirling in the crystal glass between them. Her movements were slow, deliberate, refined, the kind of control that comes from years of learning when to speak and when silence cuts deeper. Outside, the city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, lights twinkling over the hills, glass towers reflecting each other like mirrors of ambition. And at the center of it all sat her mansion, her fortress. But tonight wasn't about luxury. It was about closure. Edward Carlyle had spent his entire career being the man everyone wanted to impress. He had founded Carlyle and Ford Capital, built an empire, and crushed anyone who questioned his authority along the way. He was the kind of man who wore success like armor and arrogance like perfume. Years ago, he had been her boss. She'd been a quiet financial analyst. Smart, disciplined, but too unpolished, as he once said. She wore braids, spoke with precision, and refused to shrink herself to fit their narrow mold. He had mocked her once during a presentation. She still remembered that moment. "Miss Aisha," he'd said in front of the entire boardroom, interrupting her mid-sentence. "Your analysis is interesting, but let's be honest, our clients want confidence, not lectures." Then came the laughter. Her face burned that day, not from embarrassment, but from a silent vow forming in her heart. One day, he'll listen, and now, 8 years later, he was sitting across from her, sipping wine she had chosen, in a mansion she owned. Edward raised his glass, pretending to be casual. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "I must admit, when your assistant called me, I thought it was a prank." "A dinner invitation from you? It's been what, 10 years? 8, she corrected gently. 8 years since I left your company," he smirked. "Ah, right. You were in analytics, weren't you? I remember faces, not job titles." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were unreadable. "And I remember words." "Words?" "The ones you said when you fired me." He blinked. "I fired you?" "You told me I didn't fit the company's brand," she said softly. "That clients would feel uncomfortable taking financial advice from someone who looked like me." The words didn't come out angry. They came out calm, razor sharp, because they didn't need to shout. Edward's expression flickered for half a second, just long enough for discomfort to show, before he hid it behind a sip of wine. "Business was different back then," he said. "You know how image matters in corporate environments. It wasn't personal." Aisha smiled. Small, knowing, dangerous. It always is. The dining hall glowed with golden light. Her art collection lined the walls. Bold, black artists from Ghana, Nigeria, Atlanta. Paintings that breathed culture, power, identity. She watched him look at them, curious and confused. "You collect these?" he asked. "I don't collect," she replied. "I preserve what the world tries to ignore." He forced a chuckle. "Always the poet, huh?" "You had a way with words, I'll give you that." She tilted her head. "You never gave me that before." Dinner arrived. Roasted duck, truffle risotto, aged wine worth more than his first car. Her staff moved quietly, like shadows trained for elegance. Edward noticed everything, the precision, the silence, the discipline. And for the first time, he wondered who exactly Aisha had become. "You've certainly done well," he said, slicing into the duck. "This place, it's—" He looked around. 50 million, you said?" 53, she corrected. "But who's counting?" He laughed nervously. "And you own this?" She nodded. "Every inch, no loans, no partners." He leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "So what do you do now? You've obviously cracked the code." Venture capital? Hedge funds? Her lips curved faintly. Something like that, he chuckled. You always were ambitious. I'll give you that. She took a sip of wine. You didn't say that when you told me I was too emotional for finance? He froze, the memory cutting through the years. Did I say that? Yes, she said. Right before you took my data, presented it as your own, and called me your assistant in front of investors. Edward's throat tightened. He had no recollection, but that didn't mean it wasn't true. He'd done worse. The industry rewarded cruelty dressed as confidence. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate. Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon. Inside, the air between them vibrated with unspoken history. Finally, Edward tried again. Look, Aisha, I may have been hard on you, but that's what it takes to survive in that world. You should thank me, really. It seems I pushed you to greatness. Her eyes flicked up, cold but calm. You didn't push me. You buried me. I just learned how to grow underground. The line hit him like a punch. He exhaled, trying to laugh it off, but his voice cracked slightly. So this dinner, what's it really about? You could have sent a message. You could have ignored me. Aisha leaned back in her chair, her silhouette outlined by the city lights behind her. I wanted to see if power ever makes men remember the people they stepped on. Edward's fork clinked against his plate. So this is revenge, then? No, she said softly. If it were revenge, you wouldn't be sitting here sipping my wine. It's reflection. I've learned that sometimes the best way to close a wound is to invite the person who caused it, and let them see how well you've healed. He stared at her, speechless. The confidence he once wielded effortlessly now felt like a mask slipping. Her phone buzzed on the table, a notification lighting up the screen. Aisha and Cosa, Forbes feature approved. Edward saw it and blinked. Aisha and Co? She smiled. My firm. You have a firm? Global investment and tech consultancy. Offices in London, Dubai, and Johannesburg. We manage a portfolio larger than your entire company's worth. His mouth opened slightly. You're kidding. I don't joke about numbers, she said. He sat back, stunned. That's impressive. Her gaze softened slightly, though her tone remained steady. It's not impressive. It's overdue. The world told me I was too different to lead. I decided to prove it wrong. He looked around the mansion again, taking it all in. The artwork, the architecture, the quiet dignity that seemed to hum through the air. He couldn't place it before, but now he could feel it. The difference. Everything here had meaning. It wasn't just wealth. It was earned grace. And for the first time, Edward Carlyle felt small. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass. Aisha glanced toward it. Funny thing about rain, she said. It's cleansing, not destructive. It washes away everything fragile, leaves only what's meant to stay. He stared at her, at the way she sat so calm, so composed, without needing to boast or bite. Why didn't you ever reach out? He asked finally, almost vulnerable now. You could have come back. I'd have given you a better position. You were talented, she smiled faintly. You never would have given it to me. I had to take it for myself. Edward lowered his eyes, ashamed but not sure why. You've changed. No, she said softly. I just stopped asking for permission. When dessert came, chocolate souffle with gold leaf, neither touched it. The tension had turned from sharp to solemn. She stood slowly, pushing her chair back. Dinner's over, Mr. Carlyle. He stood too, fumbling with his jacket. Thank you for the meal, he murmured. She nodded. Consider it a reunion, of sorts. He turned toward the door, then paused. Aisha, he said quietly, I really am proud of what you've done. She gave him a small, enigmatic smile. You should be. You helped build it. Every insult, every door you closed, I turned them into walls. He nodded, unsure what else to say. As he stepped out into the rain, his driver opened the car door. But he hesitated. He looked back at the mansion, at the glowing windows, the silhouette of the woman who had once been his employee. She stood by the glass watching him leave, poised and untouchable, and for the first time in his life, Edward Carlyle, the man who thought he'd seen everything, realized he had just dined with something he couldn't buy, bribe or break, power. Real power. The silence between them lingered like smoke. Thin, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Evelyn moved gracefully around the dining table, her heels silent against the marble. Every motion was deliberate, a flicker of elegance that seemed effortless but carried the weight of control. The gold chandelier above them scattered soft light over the table set for two. Crystal glasses, a bottle of Bordeaux older than her ex-boss's company, and a porcelain plate that gleamed against the dark mahogany. Mr. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He couldn't place her. Something about her calm confidence unnerved him. The same confidence he once believed she lacked when he fired her 5 years ago. "So," he said, forcing a smile, "how long have you lived here?" Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "Long enough to build what people once told me I couldn't." He laughed awkwardly. "That's good for you. I always tell my team, ambition is everything. You either rise or you get left behind, right?" Her eyes met his, steady, unreadable. "Yes," she said quietly. "Some of us had to rise from what others buried." He froze for a second, sensing something in her tone, but brushed it off. "You sound like a motivational speaker." Evelyn tilted her head. "Maybe I just learned from good examples and better mistakes." Before he could reply, her butler, Samuel, appeared at her side, a man in his 60s with silver hair and an unshakable calm. He placed a dish of roasted duck in front of Mr. Whitaker, the aroma filling the room with notes of thyme and caramelized honey. Evelyn's plate, by contrast, was simple, a salad with wine vinaigrette and figs. She didn't seem to be eating for hunger, but for ritual. Mr. Whitaker cut into the duck and took a bite, nodding approvingly. "Exquisite. Your chef must be Michelin-trained." "He was," Evelyn said, sipping her wine, "until I convinced him to work for me personally." Her tone wasn't boastful, just factual. That confidence, quiet and unforced, disarmed him more than arrogance ever could. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You remind me of someone I used to know. There was a girl who worked for me at Titan Industries. Bright, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" Evelyn asked, still calm. He smiled faintly. "Too emotional. She had potential, but she wasn't tough enough for the corporate world. I think her name was Evelyn, actually. Evelyn Hart." Evelyn didn't blink. "What a coincidence," she said softly, setting down her glass. For a second, he froze. The way she said her own name, it wasn't confirmation, it was revelation. He blinked, then laughed awkwardly, unsure. "Wait, no, you can't be—" "I am," she said simply. The laughter died in his throat. The fork in his hand trembled slightly before he set it down. Evelyn leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on the table. "You fired me because I told you the board was lying about the merger numbers. You said I was naive, that I didn't understand how power worked. You made sure I couldn't get another job in the city after that." Mr. Whitaker swallowed hard. "That was business, Evelyn." "You have to understand, I do understand," she interrupted softly. "You were right. It was business. Just not mine, then." The fireplace crackled faintly behind her, the only sound in the vast marble hall. Whitaker's mind raced. How had she gone from unemployed to sitting in a mansion bigger than any of his? He scanned the space, the artwork, the subtle luxury, the quiet staff who moved like trained professionals. Nothing about this woman screamed luck. It was strategy. He cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself," Evelyn smiled faintly. "Better than most. I started my own consulting firm. My first client was one of your investors, the one you pushed out of Titan. He liked my instincts. I helped him rebuild everything you lost." Whitaker blinked, his face paling. You took Titan's investors?" "I gave them back what you took, their trust." He leaned back, his breathing shallow. "So this dinner, what is it, revenge? You wanted to rub this in my face?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't have invited you to dinner." "Then why?" She rose from her chair slowly, walking to the window overlooking the city skyline. Rain had begun to fall, tracing silver lines down the glass. Her reflection shimmered in it, graceful, unbothered. "When you destroy someone, you expect them to disappear," she said softly. "You never think they'll return." Not to hurt you, but to forgive you. Whitaker stared at her, confused. Forgive me? For what? For giving me a reason to become better than you? The words hung in the air, calm, but sharp as glass. He blinked, his pride faltering under the weight of her composure. You know, Evelyn, people like us, we make hard decisions. You can't take them personally. She turned, walking back toward him. People like you make decisions to protect your ego. People like me make them to survive. He exhaled, shaking his head, trying to regain his composure. You've changed. No, she said, smiling faintly. You're just seeing me clearly for the first time. She signaled to Samuel, who approached quietly and set a small box on the table in front of Mr. Whitaker. What's this? He asked, suspicious. A gift, she said. Something you once said I didn't deserve. A seat at the table. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a titanium pen, engraved with his own signature. The same one he used to sign her termination papers years ago. His fingers trembled. You kept this? Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. No, I bought your company last month. That's the pen they found in your office. He looked up sharply, his breath catching. You, what? I own Titan now, she said quietly. Every asset? Every contract? Even your penthouse? Whitaker's mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't do it to destroy you, she continued. I did it to show that what you called weakness was strength. He sat back, staring at her in disbelief. The realization hit him like a slow storm. The woman he dismissed as emotional had outsmarted him completely. She walked back to her chair, took a sip of her wine, and smiled. Eat your dinner, Mr. Whitaker, it'll get cold. He stared at her across the table, the weight of humiliation pressing on him harder than any loss of money. For the first time in his life, the man who once commanded boardrooms sat silently, unable to speak, unable to fight, only able to feel. Evelyn didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than vengeance. The rain outside grew heavier, and thunder rolled in the distance. Samuel cleared the plates quietly, leaving behind only 2 glasses and the soft hum of a woman who had turned her pain into power. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The storm outside continued to lash against the glass walls of the mansion, streaks of rain glimmering under the soft lights. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like an echo of the silence between them, heavy, charged, and unresolved. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the wine glass held delicately in her hand. The faint glow of the chandelier caught the edge of her cheekbone, giving her face a regal sharpness. Every line, every stillness of her body spoke of control, not the loud, domineering control of a tyrant, but the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to prove herself. Mr. Whitaker shifted in his seat again. He couldn't stop glancing around, at the marble floors, at the art on the walls, at the serene confidence of the woman across from him. Something in his chest twisted with discomfort. Years ago, he'd been the one in charge, the one whose approval determined her career. But now, in this room, under her calm gaze, he felt exposed. Small. You've done well for yourself, he said finally, his tone forcedly polite. I mean, this place, it's impressive. Evelyn smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Thank you. I like to keep things simple. Whitaker gave a short laugh. Simple? Evelyn, this dining hall is bigger than my apartment. She tilted her head. Maybe simplicity isn't about size. Maybe it's about peace. Her voice was calm, measured, and it made him uneasy. He took a sip of his wine, buying himself time. I'm glad you found success, he said, forcing a casual tone. I really am. I don't hold grudges about the past, and I hope you don't either. We were all just doing our jobs. Evelyn's gaze sharpened slightly. Is that what you call it? He hesitated. What else would I call it? She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting gently on the edge of the table. Her eyes never left his. Let me remind you, Mr. Whitaker, you called me emotional. You told the board I lacked stability, that hiring someone like me was a risk. You didn't just fire me. You ended my career in that city. You made sure every door closed before I even knocked. Whitaker flinched at her precision. Evelyn, She raised a hand, stopping him. You don't have to apologize. I'm not looking for that. I just want you to remember. The way she said it, quietly, almost tenderly, unsettled him more than if she had shouted. I do remember, he said finally, exhaling. You were bright, sharp, but you were inexperienced. The board didn't like how outspoken you were. I was under pressure. It wasn't personal. Evelyn's eyes softened slightly, but her tone didn't. It's always personal when the one being sacrificed looks like me. Her words landed like a truth he didn't want to face. He looked down, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. The rain outside intensified, a storm building over the city. Evelyn stood up quietly and walked to the massive window that overlooked the skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost of her younger self, smaller, uncertain, standing beside the woman she'd become. When you fired me, she said softly, I walked out of your office in the rain. I remember clutching my box of things, my heels slipping on the pavement, my coat soaked through. I remember thinking, maybe you were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough for your world. Whitaker stared at her back, his throat tightening. But then, she continued, I realized something. You weren't rejecting my potential. You were protecting your comfort. You couldn't handle the idea of a black woman challenging your authority. You thought I was naive because I cared about people more than numbers. He opened his mouth, but she turned and cut him off with her gaze. And maybe I was naive, she said. But I learned. I built something of my own, from scratch. No board, no lies, no gatekeepers. She returned to the table, every step steady, every breath deliberate. For 3 years, I worked alone in a tiny room with one broken laptop, she said. I pitched clients who never showed up. I slept on an air mattress. I lived on black coffee and hope. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered the look on your face that day, the way you didn't even flinch when you ended my career. That memory became fuel. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Evelyn, I didn't know it affected you that deeply, she smiled faintly. That's exactly the problem. You never looked deep enough. Her butler, Samuel, entered silently with dessert, 2 plates of chocolate souffle, steam rising gently into the air. Evelyn thanked him softly, then turned her attention back to Whitaker. Do you know who gave me my first chance? She asked. He shook his head. Your former investor, the one you pushed out of Titan to secure your own promotion. He trusted me, said I reminded him of what he used to be before the system changed him. I helped him rebuild everything you lost. Whitaker froze, realization dawning. You worked for him? Evelyn nodded. Until he retired. Then he left me his shares. That's how I started acquiring Titan stock, piece by piece. His mouth went dry. You're saying you own... Yes, she said, cutting him off calmly. I own Titan now. Every department, every contract, every patent. Even the building you once called yours. He sat back, the color draining from his face. The storm outside cracked with thunder, as if punctuating his downfall. Evelyn took a slow sip of her wine. When I signed the papers, I didn't feel revenge. I felt closure. It wasn't about you anymore. It was about proving something to myself. That I could build an empire without losing my soul. He rubbed his temples. You're incredible, Evelyn. I don't even know what to say. She set her glass down. Say thank you. He blinked, confused. For what? For showing you what respect looks like. He gave a small, shaky laugh, equal parts disbelief and regret. You're giving me a second chance? Not a chance, she corrected. An opportunity. You built something powerful once, but you forgot the people who made it possible. I'm giving you the chance to rebuild, this time with humility. He exhaled deeply, shaking his head. I don't deserve that. Evelyn smiled, not with pity, but with understanding. Maybe not, but I didn't deserve what happened to me either. Life has a way of balancing the scales. He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time his arrogance truly cracked. The man who once dismissed her as emotional now looked humbled, even small. You're different, he said finally. Completely different from the girl I remember. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft. No, I'm the same. You just never looked close enough to see me. The words silenced him completely. Samuel entered quietly again, clearing the dishes. As he passed, he gave Evelyn a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement between those who'd seen her rise from nothing. When he left, Evelyn stood up. "Come," she said. "I'll show you something." Curious, Whitaker followed her down the marble hallway. She stopped before a large painting framed in gold, a portrait of a woman with soft eyes and silver hair. "My mother," Evelyn said quietly. "She used to clean offices while I studied for my degree. She told me never to hate the people who hurt me. Just outgrow them." Whitaker stared at the portrait, guilt thick in his throat. "She must be proud of you." Evelyn smiled faintly. She would have been. "She passed before she could see this." "I'm sorry," he murmured. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "So am I, but she's the reason you're here tonight." Because she believed forgiveness was more powerful than vengeance. He turned to her, eyes wet, voice breaking slightly. "Evelyn, I don't deserve your kindness." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she said, "Maybe not, but that's what makes it worth giving." The rain began to slow outside, the thunder fading into a soft hum. As she walked him to the front door, the air between them had changed. He was no longer the boss, and she was no longer the subordinate. They stood as two people, one humbled, one healed. Just before he stepped out into the night, he turned to her. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think power was about control. But tonight I saw something stronger." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Grace." Evelyn smiled gently. "It's the one thing money can't buy, Mr. Whitaker, but I'm glad you finally noticed." He nodded, speechless, then walked into the night, rain glistening under the streetlights. The Bentley pulled away slowly, disappearing down the long driveway. Evelyn stood there for a moment, the wind brushing against her face. She closed the door softly and whispered to herself, "Forgiveness doesn't make them right. It just sets you free." Then she turned, her heels echoing softly across the marble floor, leaving behind the quiet triumph of a woman who had not only conquered her past, but mastered her peace. The rain had stopped by dawn. A soft golden light filtered through the sheer curtains of the mansion, casting warm patterns on the polished floor. The storm that had raged through the night was gone, as if nature itself had exhaled in relief. Evelyn stood by the tall window in a silk robe, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching the city below awaken. For the first time in a long while, she felt light. The world outside her glass walls was calm. No phone calls, no contracts waiting for her approval, just the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of morning air. Samuel entered quietly. "Good morning, ma'am. I took the liberty of preparing breakfast in the garden." She turned, smiling faintly. "Thank you, Samuel. You're always one step ahead." He hesitated before adding softly, "The gentleman called." Her brow lifted. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Yes. He said he wanted to thank you again, and that he's resigning from the board of Titan, effective immediately." Evelyn paused, the faintest hint of surprise flickering in her eyes. "He's resigning?" Samuel nodded. "Said it's time to make space for new voices." A small smile curved at the corner of her lips. "Maybe he's finally learning." She turned back to the window, taking a slow sip of her coffee. Down below, the city shimmered in the morning light, full of life, full of stories. Her reflection merged with the skyline, the image of a woman who had once been underestimated, now towering quietly over everything that once defined her. She walked into the garden, a quiet sanctuary filled with white lilies, trimmed hedges, and a koi pond that rippled gently in the breeze. The scent of jasmine filled the air. She sat at a stone table under a pergola and opened her leather notebook. On the first page, written in her mother's handwriting, were the words she had once lived by. "Rise, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right." Evelyn traced the ink with her fingers. That line had carried her through sleepless nights and lonely winters. It had been her compass when she lost direction, her anchor when the world told her she wasn't enough. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. "Thank you for last night." You taught me something no boardroom ever did. Whitaker. She read it twice, then set the phone aside. The truth was, last night hadn't been about revenge. She'd imagined that moment for years. The perfect words, the perfect silence that would make him crumble. But when it finally came, she realized something profound. Vengeance was fleeting, but grace echoed. She closed her notebook and stood, her reflection gliding across the pond. Her mansion, her empire, they were no longer symbols of victory. They were simply chapters of a story that began with pain but ended in peace. As she walked through the garden, she noticed a small robin perched on the fence. It chirped once before taking flight, soaring above the trees, disappearing into the brightening sky. Evelyn followed its path with her eyes, smiling softly. Freedom, she thought, isn't about wealth. It's about release. A car engine purred in the distance, the sound of her driver pulling up. She was due at a community foundation she had built years earlier, one that provided mentorship and funding for women who'd been denied opportunities, just as she once had. As she walked toward the car, Samuel appeared again, holding a folder. "The schedule for today, ma'am." "Thank you," she said, sliding into the back seat. "And Samuel?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked up at him with warmth. "You've been with me since the beginning. Don't ever think I've forgotten that." He gave a rare, genuine smile. "It's an honor to serve someone worth following." The car began to roll down the long driveway lined with oak trees, their leaves glistening from the rain. The city stretched ahead, vibrant, alive, full of possibility. Evelyn leaned back, her mind calm, her pulse steady. As they passed the gates, she glanced one last time at her mansion. The golden light reflected off the glass, and for a fleeting moment, she saw her mother's face in the shimmer, smiling. "Proud, at peace," Evelyn whispered softly. "I did it, Mama." And then she turned her gaze forward, the camera of life, if one could call it that, would have panned upward then, capturing the image of a woman who had rebuilt herself not from vengeance, but from vision. A woman who had turned humiliation into harmony, power into peace. In the quiet hum of the morning, one truth remained. Some victories don't roar. They whisper, and Evelyn's whisper would echo longer than any applause.